the book of Numbers, in many ways, it's builds on Leviticus and its theology, and institutionalizes that theology. The practical consequences of what's given in Exodus and Leviticus is drawn out in Numbers. Okay, just the names. Once again, the Hebrew name comes from the first word in the book, in the scroll, bar mitzvah. Now, some of you are doing Hebrew. Midbar is wilderness, better than desert, because it's not like the Simpson Desert where nothing is, but it's wilderness is land that's great. You can graze, but you can't grow regular crops every year. So most of the Mallee is Midbar, okay, grazing land. And that includes some kind of land that's got high rainfall, but you can't graze. So hill land, where human beings don't cultivate, is Mithvah. So Mithvah is basically uncultivated land and therefore desert. But in the desert, okay, they're the first words there. Now in Greek, the name is arithmoi, which means numbers, from which we get arithmetic. Arithmoi, arithmetic, numbers. And English comes from the Greek, the Septuagint, we call it numbers. And the reference here is to the two censuses, the two numberings that take place in the book. The first numbering is a military census. Okay, the Israelites are about to leave Mount Sinai. They're marching to the Promised Land. It's a military campaign. They will be under threat from the enemies. They need to organize themselves in military terms. To be able to organize the Israelite army, you need to have a census to discover how many men there are of military age, to arrange them into divisions and into units. So you have a military census. At the end of the book, you have a second census, which is for land distribution, to determine the distribution of the land among the 12 tribes and all the sub-units within those 12 tribes. That's the name of the book. Now, the location and content of the book is very significant. The location, the temporal location, and the geographical location. It comes at the end of the time at Mount Sinai, and it covers the journey from Sinai to the plains of Moab to Deuteronomy, which you know all about. It's okay. That's the place and time reference. So after Leviticus, which deals with God's gift of worship, the divine service and everything to do with the divine service, and before Deuteronomy, which deals with the gift of the land and the entry into the land. It covers the journey in 3 stages, from Sinai to Kadesh, and from Kadesh to the plains of Moab. So Sinai, Kadesh, Moab. 2 journeys, 3 different stages. And it deals with traditions in the time in the wilderness. Now, and this is rather paradoxical. You would expect this to be the honeymoon period in Israel's history with God, and it is anything but a honeymoon. It is a stormy time. Right from the beginning, there's the problem of Israel continuing to sin and rebelling against God, in profound ways as well as petty ways. And it ends just before the entry into the Promised Land under the leadership of Joshua. So if you like, it ends with the death of Moses and before the entry into the land. Now, what are the main concerns of this book? This book has to do with the organization of Israel as a entity as a nation which was unique in the ancient world, and which provides the foundation then for modern democratic government. Now, in the ancient world, you had two kinds of countries. You had countries that were basically tribal, around tribal chiefs. All power is consecrated in the tribal head. He is the religious leader, he's the military leader, he's the social leader, he's the economic leader, he's everything. Right? He's the big man. Okay, in tribes, you'd know that from Batak people, the tribal leader's the big man. Now, when you had the movement from tribal leadership to nation states, then that role is filled by the king. And the king has all power. Now, in Israel, you get something unique. Israel has no human king. God is the king of Israel. In Israel, you have no human lawmakers because God makes the law. And so you get the beginning of what we call constitutional government. Constitutional government is government that's bound by law, under law. It's not over the law. Secondly, you would have expected, if this was to fit in the pattern in the ancient world, that when Moses died, he's the big man, he would have appointed somebody to be either tribal big chief or king after him. But what Moses does under God's direction is to divide responsibility and power. So you get the three very, very important institutions that are established in Israel in the book of Numbers. First of all, there's the organization of the tribes. Who's responsible for each tribe is the tribal head. And each clan has its head, and each sub-clan has its head. So you get tribal chiefs. They have total responsibility within their area of power. Then you get a military commander. Right from the beginning, Moses doesn't lead the armies of Israel. He delegates that to Joshua. Thirdly, very significantly, the military commanders and the tribal chiefs are not priests. But you have a whole tribe, which is the priestly tribe, who are responsible for worship. And then there is justice. Whereas the tribal chiefs deal with justice within their tribes and within their subunits. If there are problems between tribes, then it goes to the Sanhedrin. Justice is handled by the Council of 70 Elders. This, by the way, is the body that put Jesus to death, all the way to New Testament, the Council of 70, which begins here at this time. What you get here is a division, not just between church and state, which is a very important modern division between this and this state, but also between, which is very important for our system of government, you get a division between the administration, the government, and the judiciary. A division of power. By the way, it's this book that was very important at the time of the Puritans, which is the development of democratic government as over against the British monarchy. And basically the system of government that we have inherited here in the Anglo-Saxon world, in Australia, Great Britain, Canada, US, finds its theological roots here. Its theological roots here. Okay, the main concern then is for the organisation of Israel as a nation, with God as its leader, its king, and Moses as his deputy. Now, I would have expected Moses to be a king under God. But Moses is never spoken about in royal terms. He is a prophet. He's a priest because he belongs to the priestly tribe. But he's always spoken about as God's servant. So he is a servant of God. A servant means deputy. He's God's deputy under God. As I've indicated here, then, the organisation involves a division of power, a division of responsibility, a delegation of power. There's the tribal organisation with 12 tribes with heads and clans. There's the military organisation. You have a tribal militia. Where does the army come from? The tribes. You have a census of the tribes. And so let's say there's war. Joshua has no standing army. What he does is calls up the tribal militia. Okay, you've got the Kleine clan. I'm the head of the clan. A war comes. Then I gather together all the young men between the ages of 20 and 30, fighting age, and we form that unit in the tribe. We form one military unit. So you have a tribal militia. Can you understand the way it works? No standing army, but tribal militia. In times of emergency, all able-bodied young men are called up in tribal divisions to serve within God's army. And each one of those 12 tribes is one of the divisions within God's army. So who's the ultimate commander-in-chief? Not Joshua, but God. So the militia comes from here, but is not under the leadership of one of the tribal heads, because if one of the tribal heads is chosen, then that tribe becomes the big tribe, and he becomes the big man up here. Then there's liturgical organisation, which is given to... Just hold on. I'll just finish this. Liturgical organisation, there's one tribe, the tribe of Levi, which stands out from this, and they are responsible for worship and everything to do with worship. Okay, there's the priests, Levites, but then also the heads of the tribes have worship responsibilities. They are responsible to provide the resources for worship. The stuff that's needed to keep the worship going. And worship's expensive to keep going. So they provide the resources for this, even though they aren't priests. And then there's the national organisation, which is a matter of justice. How can you get people working together in all this? It's through the Council of 70, which is the Supreme Court, which deals with justice, all matters dealing with justice. Now, can you see here? It's a rather unique form of national organisation. It's what scholars call theocracy. What does theocracy mean?
God's at the head.
God's the ruler. Cracy is rule. Democracy, demos is people, so democracy is ruled by the people. What's aristocracy?
Ruled by aristocrats.
Aristocrats. What's monarchy?
King.
Ruled by a king. Okay? Now, question.
No, I might pick it up on tape.
Okay, now, so that's the main concern, is to organise the people in practical terms for their life after Sinai. And the second concern, that's the one concern, their organisation, is to prepare them for life in Canaan, which is picked up at greater length in the book of Deuteronomy. So you get legislation for settlement in the land. Lots of laws are given and regulations and organisation is put in place for what will happen when they enter the land. You get the allotment of the land to its 11 tribes, or 12 tribes, because the tribe of Joseph is split into two halves. 11 tribes, but not Levi, and the various clans. And then you get 2 chapters which deal with the liturgical calendar. The liturgical calendar which can only kick in when they enter the promised land. Because the liturgical calendar has to do with bringing offerings. The offerings come from the land. And so it only is relevant once they come in the land. The structure is quite complex. And it's hard to put it in simple form. the big outlines are very, very clear. And I don't expect you to know all the detail, but just the general big 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, so it falls into 5 parts. The first part deals with the organisation of the people of God for their march as God's army to the promised land. So the organisation of Israel for march to the promised land. Chapters 1 to 4 give us the censors for the organisation of Israel as God's army. Chapters 5 through to the first part of 9 deal with 2 very important issues. The one issue has to do with ritual purity. If God is the commander-in-chief and he marches with Israel as his army, if they are to be his army, they need to be in a state of ritual purity, because otherwise God will not turn out to be their friend, he will be their enemy. So the importance of ritual purity for the whole nation, and then also the importance of making provision for the divine service, because it's through the divine service that God is present with his people, and he marches with his people as their commander-in-chief. Just the subdivision of that then, there's regulations about purity, holiness and blessing, which comes out of holiness. The provision that the tribes are to make for worship, and worship which focuses on God's revelation, God speaking to Moses and through Moses. And then there's the responsibility of the Levites for Israel's purity. You have 2 groups of the priests. You have the priesthood. The priests are responsible for God's holiness. The Levites are responsible for the purity of the people. There's a division of responsibility. And then that culminates in God's leadership of Israel as his army from Sinai to the promised land. How God leads his army through the desert. Then chapters 11 and 12 deal with the journey from Sinai to Kadesh, the oasis location in the Sinai Peninsula. Chapters 13 through to 19, it begins with Moses sending 12 spies to the land to investigate how best to occupy the land. They come back with good news and bad news. The good news is that it's a fantastic land. The bad news is that it's inhabited by giants and military geniuses. It's armed to the teeth, and we are sitting ducks if we think that we can occupy the land. Notice the rebellion of the spies, and they then lead the people in rebellion against God. And there's only 2 of the 12 tribes which don't give a bad spin on it, and that's Joshua and Caleb.
Their tribes, like those 2 persons?
Those 2 persons who are located in particular tribes.
Yeah, I remember now.
Then chapter 16 to 19 deals with the most terrible incident in the desert. The most terrible incident at Sinai was the making of the golden calf. Now you get equivalent rebellion where you get the tribe of Korah, which is a priestly tribe, who are basically good Australians. And they are followed by the Reubenites. Reuben, who is the oldest of Jacob's sons. They think that Moses and Aaron are too big for their boots. And basically they present an argument which I hear all over the place in the church. And that's this: all God's people are holy. Is that true?
Yep.
Therefore they conclude, therefore all God's people should be priests. Right? It doesn't follow. They want the perks. They don't want the responsibility, they want the perks of office. And they want all the privileges of the priesthood. And so you get this rebellion of them. And then in connection with that, you get legislation about the responsibility of the priests to prevent desecration. The priests are responsible for holiness. The Levites are responsible for purity. And that's mapped out in great detail in those chapters in very, very practical terms. Next. Oh, I think I've got some overlap here. I jumped here to here, but never mind. We've done that. Missed out on this. Then you get the journey from Kadesh to the plains of Moab. There's the failure of Moses at a place called Meribah. The people once again murmur against God, they complain against God, and Moses is fed up to his teeth, as most leaders invariably are. No matter what they do, people are never satisfied. And instead of doing what God commanded, which is to speak to the rock to provide water for the people, he, in anger, hits the rock with his staff. God still honours him, water comes out, but he then is told that he will not be able to lead the people into the promised land.
It's a bit rough after 80 years of...
Service, my word, yes. But if you're going to be a leader in the church, you can't muck around with God's word.
Just a question.
Yes.
Moses died at about 120.
20. Yes.
What was the life expectancy at that stage?
Well, that was the upper limit.
God had said
What was the upper limit?
Yeah, the upper limit. Remember the flood? That's the limit. So Moses has the maximum lifespan. But entry into the land is delayed. Then you get the journey to Moab, the death of Aaron, and then the last terrible incident, rebellion of people, is the incident at Baal Peor. Now, something terrible happens here, which you've got to read between the lines to understand. The Israelites about to enter the land of Canaan. The basic form of worship in Canaan involved Baal, the sky god. He's male. He is the husband. Baal means husband, master, owner. Now Asherah is earth mother, his wife, mistress, mother. Now Canaanite religion was basically sexual in its orientation. The way the Canaanites understood what was happening in the world was that Baal is the sky god, Asherah is the earth mother. Baal inseminates the earth with rain. The rain is the semen that comes into the womb of the earth, which produces crops and fertility. Now, Baal worship therefore involved the sexual intercourse between the priests of Baal and the priestesses of Asherah. And the way you worship Baal was for a woman to come to the shrine and to have sexual intercourse with the priest, and for a man to come and have sexual intercourse with a priestess of Asherah. And you did this at the end of puberty before you got married, and this was supposed to ensure fertility, tapping divine fertility. So it's a sexual cult. It has to do with fertility. It's a fertility cult. Now what happens here at Baal Peor is that the Israelites meet with the first group of Baal worshippers, and the women interest the men, And then what happens then is a sexual orgy. At this place, Baal Peor, but it's a shrine of Baal, they do it. But then the most terrible incident is that one of the Midianite women is taken by one of the Israelite men, and they have sexual intercourse within the tabernacle itself.
In the tabernacle?
In the tabernacle itself. Okay, terrible incident. Terrible desecration of God's holiness. And Moses has to intercede for the people. The couple is put to death, and God sends the fiery serpents to punish the people. That's the apostasy at Baal Peor, and that's a pointer of the danger of what's going to happen when they come into the land. Always the Israelites are attracted back to the worship of the original inhabitants, which is that sex cult, worship of Baal. So as soon as you come into Joshua and Judges, Samuel, particularly 1st and 2nd Kings, there's always that problem with the worship of Baal that people keep slipping back into. It's very attractive, at least theoretically. The consequences are terrible. Then after the apostasy at Baal Peor, you have the second census for the distribution of the land, and then you get practical consequences of that. There's new legislation given for particular cases which are going to be problematic. And here's something that's quite unique in the ancient world. God makes special provision for those families that die in which have no male heirs. Now, normally in the ancient world, if my family died, say if I had no sons, then my wife, my daughters would have no inheritance whatsoever. They'd become paupers. They'd have no livelihood. But God provides for daughters to inherit the property of their fathers if there's no male heir. Joshua is appointed as Moses' successor as the military commander, and only as the military commander. You get the liturgical calendar for the offerings that are to be brought to God in the Promised Land. And then you get regulations about votive offerings. Remember votive offerings? Things that you vow to give to God. And the most important votive offering is the offerings that they bring to God after a battle. If God is the commander-in-chief, and if Israel is God's army, to whom does the booty from battle, war belong?
God.
To God. Okay? And there's ways of regulating that. However, God doesn't keep all the booty to himself. Some of it goes to the tabernacle, to him. The rest is divvied amongst the soldiers. So it's the whole question of dealing with booty. And then lastly, the book ends with the division of the land, the allotment of the land. The area on the east side of the Jordan is given to Reuben and Gad, and the tribe of Manasseh, and the other part is already theoretically divided, but they don't take possession of it because they haven't entered the land. And then you get a summary of the stages of the journey from Sinai to the land of Canaan, and then you get the division of the rest of the land of Canaan amongst the 12 tribes, and there's special cities then for the Levites. Now, how is the land divided? Can we go to chapter 33, 50 to 55? And is it Dylan or is it David? One of the D's. Did it David?
No.
Yes.
The first piece. You've got
The division of the land, 33, 50 to 56.
3, 50 to 56.
Now, as we go through this, you need to understand that the land is never owned by the people. It's God's land. He gives the people tenure. of the land. He leases, if you like, to use modern term, he leases the land to the 12 tribes.
So that relates to that parable of sending the prophets to
Exactly, yes.
And this is the book of Leviticus.
Yes.
On the plains of Moab by the Jordan, from Jericho, the Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into Canaan, drive out all the inhabitants of the land before you. Destroy all their carved images and their cast idols, and demolish all their high places. Take possession of the land and settle in it, for I have given you the land to possess. Distribute the land by lot according to your plans. To a larger group give a larger inheritance, and to a smaller group give a smaller one. Whatever falls to them by lot will be theirs. Distribute it according to your ancestral tribes. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land, those you allow to remain will become barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides. They will give you trouble in the land where you will live, and then I will do to you what I plan to do to them."
Three things here that are very significant. First of all, when they take possession of the land, they are to take the land from the pagan people. They've forfeited their right to the land. They are allowed to take the land from the people. They didn't do that. Secondly, they are to destroy all the holy places within the land. Not outside the land, but only in this land are they to destroy all the shrines of pagan gods. Why? Because this is God's land. There's no place for any idol, any pagan shrine, any other god in God's presence. Now, if you want to take it to the New Testament, this doesn't apply. We can't take this and say, therefore here in Australia we should destroy the Buddhist temple down in Kensington. It's what happens within the church is the application of that. Thirdly, the land is to be distributed by allotment. Now, it's to be allotted to people, and the full story you'll find out is that the high priest is responsible for allotment in the presence of God at the tabernacle. So God determines which tribe receives which portion of his land. And that's to prevent the powerful tribes grabbing the best parts and the weak tribes getting the worst parts. So God allots the land for their use. And as a result of this, then the land remains God's land, and you can't sell the land. Why can't you sell the land? You don't own it, therefore you can't sell it. It must be passed down through the families. And if it's not the immediate family, then it goes out to the extended family. But land cannot be sold. God's land cannot be sold because it belongs to God, and the people who occupy it are determined by God himself. Question mark somewhere? Yes, here, question.
Basically, they just roll the dice, and whoever gets whatever it lands on.
That's it. So all the land is divvied up into pockets, and then you have one dice, which you have one set of dices with the lots with the name of the 12 tribes. So you get the big pockets then. Okay, you get this piece of land. Okay, you grab it from one container, and then you grab the name of the 12 tribes from the other container.
Okay.
So the territory, you get the name Judah. Okay, let's say you take that out from this, then you go to the other. Dice is not the right person. It's lot. It's probably a piece of pottery with names written on it in a container. A bit like cross lotto, this kind of stuff or something. So the priest takes out the name Judah and then puts his hand in the bag with the other lots, and he takes out that territory around the city of Jerusalem. Okay, that's their allotment. And so first of all, he takes out the allotments for the tribes, and then within the tribes, then you get the allotments for the clans. That's the bigger, the subunits. And everything is, divided into its portions, all the way down to the father's houses, which are the extended families. So there is clinic territory in Israel, you know, say for example, and that was given to my ancestors when they entered the land under Joshua. Okay? And that would remain belonging to me in perpetuity. Nobody could sell it and gain it. No, they could steal it. Enemies could take it away, but you can't sell it.
Yeah.
Right? The land remains God's land. Now you need to know this because a lot of stuff only makes sense if you see that, strictly speaking, there is no land ownership in Israel. There's land tenure, but there's no land ownership. God is the owner of the land, and he always remains the owner of the land. Lots of stuff in the book of Deuteronomy that you've been having a look at will only make sense if you keep that in mind.